Hello and welcome to Trade Matters. I'm Owen from the Martin Centre, and in this episode we are asking, who wins and who loses when farmers block roads? When trade agreements become controversial in Europe, farmers often find themselves at the centre of the debate. Whether it is Mercosur, CETA or future trade agreements, concerns from the agricultural sector frequently shape political debates, influence parliamentary votes, and sometimes even slow down or even block trade agreements altogether. At first glance, this may look like a conflict between farmers and trade, but the reality is much more nuanced. European farmers operate under some of the world's highest standards. They face legitimate concerns about competition, fairness, and the future viability of farming in Europe. At the same time, trade agreements are no longer just about tariffs and exports. Increasingly, they are instruments of competitiveness, resilience, supply chain security, and geopolitical influence. Europe needs both. So perhaps the real question is not whether Europe should choose between trade and agriculture, it is whether Europe can build a model where both can succeed together. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Trade Matters. This episode we are talking and we are asking, who wins and who loses? When farmers block roads, Europe listens. I'm Dr. Owen Dre from the Wilfred Martin Centre for European Studies, and I am delighted to be joined today by Alexander Anton, Secretary General of the European Dairy Association, Max Schulman, Senior Advisor, Central Union of Agricultural Producers and Forestry Owners from Finland, and John Clarke, the European Commission legendary trade negotiator, formerly Director of the Commission, and a general trade expert. Okay, so at the start, I'd like to just focus on the current state of play. So maybe, to Alexander and Max, I would ask, if you had 1 or 2 minutes with an EU trade negotiator before they enter the negotiation room, what would you want them to understand about, the concerns of European farmers and European agriculture today? Maybe, Max, if you want to go first.
No, I think it's a very, very relevant question, because sometimes we feel that once the negotiations start, there is not really a full understanding on what the European farming sector really is about. Sometimes we feel that we are a little bit absent, at least when it comes into the information that has been going into the trade negotiators as well, once they start this whole process. So we feel that we have been a bit left to the side. So I think that's the first thing what you would see that the farmers would react to. Sometimes when the farmers react and say no, it does not mean that you are straight against it. It means that, wait a second, do they have all the facts with them when they start the negotiations about the sectors, about what we can deliver, and also how we are producing, the production standards and all of these. So I think that is a big, big thing that we would like to see being handled from the beginning, to say, look guys, we know what you are doing. We know what you have to cope with. We know what you have to fulfill for standards and all of this. Yeah. And I think this is a lack of trust, I think, from the beginning, that we need to somehow mitigate in the next trade negotiations.
Yeah, and certainly it appears that way because, traditionally, farmers kind of view it that they're presented with this trade agreement and then they either have to accept or reject the whole thing together. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you are totally right in that. I think that instead of feeling that we are part of the negotiations, the farmers feel that we have been traded off during the negotiations. And that's why maybe there is a little bit of a negative vibe in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Anton, what's your take on this?
Well, you ask what I would say, tell a trade negotiator 2 minutes before he's entering the negotiation room. That is an opportunity that we don't have. And I don't really represent the farming sector. I represent the dairy processing sector, which is 50% cooperative, so farmers owned, and 50% in private hands. But I have to say that over the last years, and it was an initiative of the former EU Commissioner for Agriculture, Phil Hogan, who became Commissioner for Trade then, that he really installed a full directorate in DG Agri, and then John know that from own experience, on an international directorate in DG Agri. So what happens is, no, they don't call us 2 minutes before they go to the negotiation room, but frankly, my experience is they come to us quite before, just taking the temperature, checking out, and seeing where our red lines are from a dairy processing point of view, from a dairy point of view, which is a very offensive sector, of course. And that has been reinforced. I mean, Commissioner Christoph Hansen now, he's doing the trade missions, and he's talking about reciprocity, about the protection of certain markets and of opening new markets. So he had that balance in. So I have to nuance, but I'm not speaking from the farmer sector. Those who really export the produce, which is the processing company, we are in contact and we are really feeling that we are taken serious here. And then when it comes to specific issues, we know the Commission doesn't move a iota without talking to the member states. And whatever the Commission does, they do it in the remit of a mandate, which they did get from the Council, from the member states.
John, if I could come to you, I'm just wondering, because every trade agreement now in Europe, farming agriculture is very much to the centre of it. And I'm just wondering, were these concerns as prevalent 10 or 20 years ago? Or are we looking at a completely kind of different kind of political landscape now?
A lot has changed in the last 20 years. Agriculture has always been deeply political. As they say, there's a cow in every commune, a pig in every parish.
Yeah.
It's a very small part of European GDP, but massive in terms of votes, political control, and sensitivity.
Yes, yeah.
Because food production is it's not like producing T-shirts or computer screens. Yeah, it's about health, environment, food, our well-being. So it's very, very politically sensitive. And until 2000 or a bit later, it was for that reason almost excluded from trade policy and trade negotiations.
Okay. Yep.
The WTO hardly made a dent in agriculture. It was excluded.
Yeah.
It's only since about in the last 15, 20 years that agriculture has become mainstreamed into European trade negotiations. And I think that's for three reasons. One, the EU agri-food sector is much more self-confident and competitive than it was 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
The milk quota abolition is a good example of that. CAP reforms have actually made several sectors able to compete globally.
Yeah.
Secondly, the European Union embarked on a wave of free trade agreements.
Yeah.
And under the international rules, you have to include all sectors in an FTA. So you can't simply exclude agriculture.
Yeah.
And thirdly, Europe's trading partners, the early ones, South Africa, Mercosur, of course, insisted that agriculture should be part of that negotiation. Otherwise, no deal. So the EU, had no choice.
Yeah.
And I think it has recognised in the negotiations that the European farmers have a lot of legitimate concerns, grievances about trade opening, the impact of imports. Not all farmers benefit from trade.
Yeah.
A lot of the value goes to the processors or retailers. This is a big problem in Ireland in particular and other member states. And the Commission, we tried to recognise those sensitivities in our negotiations. One, maximising our export potential. Two, sheltering sensitive sectors like beef, poultry, sugar from liberalisation, which would be damaging to the sector. Ensuring that imports are safe, very, very, very basic. And also the other part of the bargain, if you like, providing public support through the CAP to vulnerable farmers. So in all those ways, the EU has tried to, faced with the necessity of bringing agriculture into trade negotiations, tried to maximise the benefits and mitigate any problems.
And do you think then that for fundamentally different geopolitical reasons, that we could be going back to a situation where politics will trump the idea of completing these all-encompassing free trade agreements, and we could be going back to a situation like with India, where we just exclude agriculture in order to achieve kind of more fundamental geopolitical priorities?
Yes, I think the European Union's free trade agreement agenda is reaching its limits, is running out of road, as they say.
Yeah.
By 2030, there will be no more negotiations with anybody. Most of Europe's trade will be preferential at that point.
Okay.
The only countries with whom we will not have agreements will be Russia, USA, and China. 3 very big partners, actually.
Yeah.
But that's not on the cards. So the FTA agenda will be exhausted by 2030.
Okay.
And the EU will then need to look at different instruments if it needs to improve its agri-food trade.
Yeah. So we're entering kind of a different stage in how we address global trade.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
Interesting to know. Okay, I want to talk just about issues of openness and fairness. Maybe to Alexander and Max, I'd be interested. When farmers or indeed producers, processors, raise concerns about some of the recent agreements like CETA and Mercosur, what are their key worries and what do they believe is kind of still unresolved from their viewpoint?
Frankly, since you talk about the CETA, that was back in 2017, and we all remember that.
Yeah.
We had in Brussels the farmers' protests and the end of the European beef sector, the end of dairy and whatever, because the Canadian dairy industry has unfettered access to the European markets. And basically 10 years later, and it's still not formally not completely completed, but 10 years later, frankly, you don't hear anything about it. It worked well. It worked very well. It is to the advantage of the Canadian and the European processors and the farmers. So we have even, in the dairy sector, mid-size and even small-size dairy companies that have invested in Canada. You see, that is the way to go. And if you look at Mercosur, and when I see the protests across Europe of farmers, Mercosur is, for what I sense, the minimum common ground. That is where all the Polish, the French, the Spanish, every farmer can agree on. That is a black sheep. That is something we have to fight. While the real grievances are or in the national politics or in the uncertainty with the new common agricultural policy. And then Mercosur is an easy target to put all the grievance on.
Yeah.
Right, and we supported the Commission in the implementation as of 1st of May. We've seen it works. It's a phasing in, and yes, even in the dairy industry, we had CEOs in public calling the public, take care when you buy butter. The butter may come from Argentina now. Which we didn't see, right? We don't see, and there is safety nets included. So. The CETA example, that's really good that you bring that up. That is something that really helps. And when you talk about Mercosur from a dairy perspective, if I go to Brazil, you have 5 or 6 European dairy companies, privately owned and cooperatives, active in the market. There is already a close cooperation. And now for dairy, we have 30,000 tons of cheese that we can export. That will be phased in. We pay right now 28% of tariffs, and the 30,000 tons and to zero, that will be phased in 10 years. So, and it's reciprocally. So the same is true for Mercosur. So it is really very even for what they call an offensive sector like ours, it's a very precautionary principle approach. And the only time when we were in a defensive mood, that was the free trade agreement with New Zealand, because New Zealand is a mega power in terms of, if you compare the milk production per inhabitants. But even there, the Commission people, that was back to your first question, the Commission came to us and really discussed with us the opening of our market for the New Zealand dairy. And it works. There is no major issue, no issue at all that we could report about.
Okay, yeah, so practical experience, I guess. Yes. Max, what's your view on this?
No, it's a very good question. I mean, I'm looking at maybe a little bit more than from the big cereals, from the cereal side and all of these. It comes into every trade deal has its pros and cons in the way how it is. I mean, you look into the CETA side, we know Canadian grain sector, very strong, also protein crops, all of these very, very strong. But at the same time, we also can see that they have a different market that they have been targeting, all of these. So at that point, I think we knew quite well what the deal was about, how we're going to go in. Still still we could see that there were some sectors, even under the cereal side, that we wanted to be a little bit defensive to. For instance, oats, where we were able to get the quota and with the X years that it was then going down. So there was a certain protection so that the big Canadian production would not right away totally run over Europe, etc. So there was a worry from the farmers' side where, again, the negotiators actually took it seriously and it was negotiated in. So you see that if you get engaged from the beginning, even if you talk about the big crops, the grains, where we are actually very much already open trade worldwide, we have all the time been exposed to this, can see that still there we will be able to build in certain things that can protect the European growers as well. Mercosur, again, I think that here we have a big one. I think that there is more fears because people do not know enough about that market by itself. We are importing a lot of soy and corn that's coming in, goes in also here to a need. I mean, we cannot grow our own proteins enough, at least yet. Let's see when. I don't think that we will see it in the next 20 to 30 years, but we might be able to at least increase it. So we need it. So this was one thing that we could see that for us it has all the time been an open flow. Cereals are, in general, I always tell to everybody, I mean, they are movable. They do move. If there is something is needed somewhere, you will have trade. And it flows both ways. Europe is exporting also. We are also exporting cereals when it comes into the Mercosur countries. I mean, you have your malting barley, you have some high quality wheat now you can see that even there they have started to grow. So you have to keep all the time on track on this. And here I think that trade and trade deals are in a way very good. Free trade agreements in the way that it also keeps the sector, the European agriculture sector, the big crops, also assure what's happening around them. So you cannot just say that you can just stop everything, put their defensive measures in place, and then life goes on. No, we have to make sure that we are open also to take these kind of challenges and see which way we want to create our own possibilities.
Yeah.
So I think that this is thing. I think with CETA as a good example, it has worked well. We have seen that it is a trade deal that by itself today, I mean, you do not really see too much. There is a free flow, has been, and we see that there has maybe been even more investments for European side going into Canada, pea protein plants, etc., because they do have from the Canadian side a huge market in the US. Today it might be a little bit different there. The huge market is a little bit starting to cough. So we are following very closely to see that will the trade flows start to change. We also know that there has always been a trade, for instance, on durum wheat coming into the European pasta sector from there. And there we are used to it. They have high quality. They are following the quality standards. They even set the quality standards for the durum wheat as well. So there we also see that they have the same idea, high quality, be able to bring it in and all of these. And some of our industrial sectors have become very dependent on it. And at the same time, in Europe, yes, we can grow durum wheat, but we have not been able to reach the same quality standards in decades. So maybe this is sparring. We can see that there is maybe a little bit more interest to do it, but there is still a long way. So there are always sectors that will also feel that, wait a second, why do we do this deal? So, I mean, you have to remember that agriculture is very wide. It's a very wide. You always find sectors that are more defensive. Then you find the sectors that are more offensive. And every trade deal will have a little bit of a different mix, defensive, offensive as well. Also from the other side, we have to always remember food is very important for everybody. Also for the country that we are making the trade deals with. They most probably also have their sectors under the food production where they're offensive to. And defensive.
And Mercosur is not a perfect deal. I mean, it's a partnership agreement with a trade pillar, right? It's not a trade agreement. Voila. And it's not a perfect deal neither, right? We have problems with that. But I think even if you don't trust what the Commission, who is in charge for the negotiation, or what the dairy industry or the cereal industry would tell you, I would like, if I may, to quote the United States Department on Agriculture. What their analysis on the Mercosur deal, EU-Mercosur, is the provisions negotiated represent a major win for the EU in the arena of global norms, especially since the US generally considers the Mercosur countries to be like-minded on the importance of science as a basis for trade and regulatory matters. And there, they really talk about the precautionary principle, for instance, that was introduced. And so the US Department of Agriculture tells us the EU did a big win. And that is, that is not the Commission speaking. That's not an exporter speaking. It's our competitors speaking. And I think that says a lot.
No, I think that's a very good thing, because at the same time that also shows not only to Europe as a whole, to the farmers and all this, but also to the Commission, you did something right. We picked the right region. And this is something that we hope also in the next time. We are huge in agricultural and food trade. So we need to make sure that once we go in and do the negotiation, we pick the right both timing, but also the right country, right region to do it, so that also the European agriculture can still stay competitive. I mean, we are also increasing our competitiveness, and these are drivers. When you make these trade deals, this is also a driver. We have to be able to keep awake, stay on top of it, go in and make sure that there are then possibilities to invest, to be able to safeguard also the European production inside Europe, and also make sure that our citizens here have a choice also to choose European food.
Yeah, it's true. And John, just coming to you, like I think as the guys mentioned, CETA and Mercosur are a good example about how Europe can, introduce safeguards, monitoring mechanisms, etc., etc. But it's interesting, and we were briefly talking about this before taping, is that, even after all these provisions, resistance often remains. So really, are we looking at a situation where agriculture is really just the lightning rod for some much deeper structural issues?
I think it tells us that politicians tell lies. Let me unpack that rather provocative statement. Objectively, if you look at the facts, the evidence, the EU's trade agreements are, on balance, fairly beneficial for agriculture and the food sector. CETA, Japan, Korea, Mexico, even Mercosur and Australia, the competitive countries, because, as you say, we put in place all the belts and braces, all the safeguards, the in-quota tariffs, I mean, so much, to the point that I was quite amazed that our trading partners accepted so many restrictions on sensitive products. So these agreements will have virtually no negative impact, even on the sensitive sectors, on prices or productions. Exchange rate fluctuations will have much more impact. But politicians are unwilling to explain to farmers that trade is not the problem. It's not the panacea, but it's not the problem either. They find it convenient in domestic politics to blame the outsider, the foreigner, whether it's immigrants or imports. This is the oldest trick in the political playbook, and the whole Mercosur debate in Ireland, in Poland, in France, in Austria, in Belgium is all about that. And it's very unfortunate that politicians are not willing to actually tell the truth and say to their stakeholders, listen, guys, the Mercosur deal is not going to decimate your farming. There are many opportunities. We have structural problems that we need to deal with elsewhere. I'll give you an anecdote. I was in a meeting in Brittany in December. I don't recommend going to Brittany in December, by the way. It's not the best weather, but anyway, this was with the French Milk Producing Federation. And as a former Mercosur negotiator, I thought I would be lynched by all of these milk producers who were present. Not at all. They were 100% critical of the French national dairy and milk policies, which they felt had hindered their prosperity dramatically in the last 30 years, something that the Poles didn't have to deal with. So I think it all boils down to the fact that, yes, farmers in Europe face terrible challenges, lack of generational renewal, climate and environment pressure, excessive regulatory burden, dwindling profits, debt, I mean, a whole litany of problems. Trade is not the problem. And in fact, given that in most sectors, production is greater than European consumption, we need trade and exports to deal with that, overcapacity, as is the fashionable word. So I would like to see politicians, having the guts to explain the facts and the realities of agriculture and food, and the trade agreements that we have been negotiating. But it's not happening.
Yeah.
And to your point, we've been in a trade mission, I think it was with Commissioner Hansen, and he's taking farmers on his trade missions, right? And we had a French dairy farmer from the Jura, if he's listening to me, hi Paul, and who was quite critical on trade.
Yeah.
But how proud was he to find in a Japanese supermarket his Comté cheese? And that was changing his mind, right? He saw his cheese in a Japanese supermarket, and that he understood that there is no, as you say, there is a manageable risk with trade. That is manageable, and that is well managed, but there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
No, I would also say, it's very important. We have to extend our market. What are we, 450, 500 million people in Europe? We have a very good production system, high standards. There might be some challenges. We have a lot of bureaucracy coming in that I know that a lot of the different sectors are complaining about. But in general, we need a market access. We need to be able to find a good market for our high quality, either it is raw materials or straight food products as well. So we see we have built a very strong food trade, but also a very strong primary production in Europe. Now we need just to see that how far can we go. One thing that we for sure would like as farmers to see is that please involve us from the beginning and be able to open up a little bit more. Now I maybe are looking more for information from what the aim is to be able to do. What are we doing there? What is the main aim? Like with Mercosur, what was the main aim? You heard so many, different versions and all of these. It's information, misinformation to play in. But I think it's very important to go in. Farmers are also businessmen. But at the same time, it's a way of living. It's a way of life. We live on the farm and all this. So there is a certain, issue also. Wait a second. How will this affect me? My life, not only the sector itself, but my life. And for sure we have sectors that we know that will be hit harder than others, and then we start to look from there, but how can we mitigate that? And this has maybe been a big challenge to be able then to get the Commission internally to agree and to say that, okay guys, yes, we know that you do not have the tools to be able to produce, so we have to unfortunately do see and so. Yes, you have there a possibility to make in some small, adjustments into that. You have safeguard clauses put in and all of these, because also there they can see already that this sector might not be as competitive as it looked once you are looking at it internally inside Europe, once it goes out. Sugar is a good example. Plant protection products that can be used elsewhere. Usually this toolbox comes always up. These are the things that we should look into in Europe. So these can also once in a while open a better debate inside to be able to fix these things.
And do you think then that a combination of all this will be able to, because we're seeing across society in all our research, not just related to farming, is a real lack of trust in the institutions. So I'm just wondering, in a completely unintentional but possibly positive way, that the way there was so much opposition to, say, CETA, so it had to be provisionally applied, then farmers could see over a number of years it was not the end of the world. So probably the same with Mercosur, that might play a role. I'm not quite sure, like in this day and age, in the social media age, how we can kind of rebuild trust.
Can I say that? I think I'm not sure CETA is a great example. Actually, It's a bit of an outlier. Why do I say that? One, it was a proxy for the USA TTIP.
Yes.
There's a lot of opposition to TTIP, and the opponents of TTIP conveniently seized on CETA, a very harmless agreement with a very nice partner, as the kind of a voodoo figure, to sort of stick pins in, so it's not, typical in that respect. Secondly, and I'm guilty as anybody as charged on this one. We've been arguing that, look, you said that the end of the world would happen with CETA, that the beef sector would collapse, and it hasn't. Canada is not exporting an ounce of beef. I think that's not a very sincere argument to make, because we should assume at some point in time that Canada will actually start to use its very large 45,000 ton beef quota. The fact that it hasn't done up to now doesn't mean that it will not do in the future. So I think it's another example of why we should be honest.
Yes, okay, yeah.
About the good and the bad. Yeah?
Yeah.
And which we were not completely in terms of CETA.
But in CETA, if I can say, in CETA as well, I think it's a good example also how you can put it a bit further in. I mean, for instance, with plant protection products. Once there is some phase out in Europe, also on the Canadian side, they have to look into it. They have to see how is this one. They have also to, at that point, when Europe is doing it, they also have to do it. So we maintain a level playing field also in these very, very difficult things that the farmer's toolbox has now created, at least in the discussion under the Mercosur. That was handled in CETA in quite a nice way. And for sure, that put some more bureaucracy on the Canadian side, but they accepted it. Okay. So I think that we have some good examples also to pick from the deals already made that could then be brought in to the next negotiation.
You know, the European Commission really shows a huge commitment and engagement. I mean, we had a study on the 10 cumulative. They made a study on the impact of 10 cumulative trade agreements, where they studied what happens if they all fill up their quota. And we've seen that is really in the remit of the Commission. It is managed. Yeah. And so if ever the Canadians start setting up a beef production, especially for Europe, they would have to, that is foreseen. The safety nets are foreseen. And we've seen that now lately with the Brazil beef that was blocked. That was simply blocked. So it works. And on the trust side, because Ian, you talked about the trust of the European institutions, and I'm, with all my respect to you, John, and you know that, I got feedback from your performance at the French dairy event where you were, and they were thrilled. They were convinced. They told me about why didn't someone before tell us. John, with all my respect, you did the job, and for all I heard, even in French.
Where do you feel? What's me? So can I come back to what Max said about level playing field, because this is an area where there's a lot of fake news.
Yeah.
Under international law, and I'm sorry to be pedantic for 5 seconds, you cannot ban a product imported just because you dislike the way it's produced. If that product is completely safe, right, for the consumer, for health and safety, you cannot ban it just because you don't like the way it was produced. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very, very dangerous, slippery slope we're going down if we are insisting on what is fashionably called reciprocity all the time. Level playing field, mirror clauses, usually referred to as clause miroir, significantly. This is going to get the EU agri-food sector into big trouble down the line. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is very, very hard to explain to farmers.
Yes.
Very hard to explain.
If it would be applied to dairy, we wouldn't export a single ton of organic cheese to the United States of America. Okay. Let's face it.
We wouldn't be able to import soya because all the soya we import is GMO.
Yes.
We wouldn't be able to export wine to Japan because they would insist that we change our wine production practices.
No, and these are good things to remember. I mean, also one thing that would be very important also is that once these trade deals are started, also we on the farming side, sectorials and all of these, would actually sit down together and a little bit look at it and say, look guys, how can we benefit from it, the whole agri-food sector and all of these, from our own part. Open it up, have a discussion on all of these, and really see what's at stake. I mean, now it is done through the commissions, through impact assessments, if one of them exists. Sometimes it's not easy to do one of them, it's very hard to do, but it comes from there. We should be a little bit maybe also more proactive at the same way as the trade negotiators as well. Go in and say, look, guys, we want to have this. Slowly this is happening. We see already now in some of the negotiations, we have seen that we need to have this, and this. So sectors are getting more and more active. But still, there is not the full consensus to go in the whole agri-food sector together. And this would be something that I would like to see, is that once these negotiations really start, the first one that should be completed is the agri-food sector. Because that is one thing that is very important for not only Europe as a whole, but also the other country. After that, most probably it's much easier to be able to agree on the rest. We have seen the agri-food sector is not an easy one to make a deal on.
Yeah.
And to put a detail, it's geographical indications, our heritage, our iconic cheese and other food products which are protected by the quality policy of the European Union with the logos. And there, of course, and there you see it's a negotiation, it's a partnership with the other partner. And though you negotiate, of course you don't impose the European protection system. That is not a negotiation. You negotiate item by item, and then you come up with different solutions, different levels of protection, which not necessarily or necessarily do not match the European level of protection. And then still people complain, not admitting that without a trade agreement, there's no protection at all. At all. Yeah. South Africa, for instance, there is grandfathering for some of the iconic cheese names. That's a protection that we didn't have before. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Nobody claims it's perfect. But there is all of a sudden a protection, a level. And that is fantastic. That is fantastic.
So if we move on then to kind of looking at this kind of new relationship between agriculture and trade, I'm just wondering, what does this relationship look like? Because, John, you mentioned that by 2030 there'll probably be no more trade deals. So will it be a case then that Europe will finally, including the domestic politicians where most of the power still lies on a lot of these issues, really have to confront kind of the more structural issues that are impacting on European farming, and they're going to have to decide where does agriculture, rural Europe sit in the hierarchy of importance, if you know what I mean, in terms of their priorities?
Well, that's very good. I'm glad you asked me the question, as politicians would say. I don't draw a very clean distinction between, trade policy on the one hand and agricultural policy on the other hand. Okay. Agriculture has been really mainstreamed into trade policy, and will be even more so in the future as populations increase, as emerging economies acquire even more consumer taste for the kind of things that Europe produces very well. Yeah. But in terms of how agriculture should fit into the broader trade policy in the years to come, I don't see a case for any particularly new instruments or approach. The EU will use and implement its existing network of agreements to improve exports and help the agricultural economy in Europe, and diversify its suppliers as well. Yes, as part of its diversification, resilience, food security kind of agenda. It will continue to shelter sensitive sectors from unbridled liberalization. Yeah. And it will, the sort of third side of the triangle, it will continue to provide considerable subsidies or support, we call it now, to farmers who are in difficulties. That will be this kind of three-way bargain. What I'm not seeing, and I hope I'll be proven wrong in the next decade, that food has not been determined to be a strategic sector for Europe, unlike AI or semiconductors or green tech. And I think that is a strategic error on the part of the current European Commission and Council, not to see food and food security as a strategic sector, because I think we are going to see food security issues looming for the first time since World War II in the next 20 years.
Okay, thank you, John.
Might even happen before. If you look at the geopolitical things going on right now, we might have a small shock.
Okay, so Max, you were talking about your sons just before. Yeah. So I'm thinking, are you relatively optimistic that one of them could maybe have a future?
Yes, I am. And I think that most of the farmers out there today, for sure, they are looking at the situation from day-to-day basis. And sometimes the day might be a little bit gray, all of these. But in the long run, they're still looking. We need food, that we know. To be able to keep the production in Europe, we need trade. If it is intra-EU trade flows, that has to be also improved. Make sure that this works. But also to the third countries, have free trade agreements and all of these. So I think, yes, we will have it there. One thing that is very important to raise is also that we do have here the promotion policy that the Commission has put in place when it comes into food trade. So the promotion policy is something that we were very happy to see that the Commissioner Hogan, during his time, he really lifted it up to a new level.
Yeah.
Now we see that Commissioner Hansen is really enhancing it as well. And we see, because that is a very, very important tool. We have seen the US using it very heavily. Also, maybe also to boost a little bit their politics. Maybe more than for sure the food trade, as John, but we see also how important part it has been for that economy. Now we see that this has also been found to boost the European presence all over the world with these trade negotiations, but the promotion. We have to be active in that also as farmers. We have seen in many of these high-level missions how we have been able to engage more and more of the farmer cooperatives to come there, farmers to come and see, learn. And like we farmers always say, I mean, seeing is believing.
Yes.
That's the normal thing for us. If you don't see, you always have a small doubt. So I would say that, yes, there is a light in the end of the tunnel, but it needs some work still, not only on the trade policy side. I think it's more internally, if it is then the CAP or if it is the excess of bureaucracy, etc. I mean, we do have here small things. Some of them are not that small. That needs to be fixed.
It's kind of like almost a constant.
It is, and I think that that's another thing. It never stops. You all the time have to be part of it on all these. Next generation will look a little bit different into it. They are also ready to invest, find new ways. We have to give them the possibility, give them the space. We need to give technology a possibility to show what technology can do to bring Europe back into the 2026. Let's say like this. I feel once in a while when you discuss with some of the farmers, they are ready to move.
Yeah,
but somehow there is a policy that is actually constricting it to move. They cannot move because I cannot do it because of this and that. And I do not only hear it from young new farmers, I hear it also for today older farmers as well.
Yeah. Alexander, last word to you.
Food security. I mean, in the last State of the Union, the President of the European Commission has, for the first time, by the way, talked about agriculture and food, and she called agriculture and food a strategic asset of our union. And in the vision for agriculture of food of Christoph Hansen, of our Commissioner for Agriculture and Food, they claim to step up the food diplomacy of the European Union. That is, part of it is a promotion policy, but it is food diplomacy. That's to your point about food scarcity around the world. We've seen that in 2011, Arabic Spring. That was a food-related issue. The French Revolution would not have taken place without a shortage of grain. So that is the positive outlook that the European Commission is really behind the farmers, which is a little bit fading away with the new common agricultural policy. We see tectonic shifts, and that all leads, of course, to an insecurity at farm level. But as Max said, as a farmer, the farming systems will adapt, and they do. In the dairy sector, they do adapt. And they are competitive at world scale. We produce 114% of the milk we use in the European Union. We have to export 14%, or you have to tell us which 14% of the dairy farmers have to stop dairy farming. You're Irish. I mean, you're well placed to know a self-sufficiency of 220% in dairy, and the export of Irish butter and Irish cheddar cheese to the United States of America is a pillar. The economic footprint of the Irish dairy industry in the United States of America is bigger than the economic footprint of the Irish dairy industry in Ireland. So, that is the world we're living in, and the Irish farmer live very well with that, I think, and they acknowledge.
The debate about trade and agriculture is often presented as a choice, but Europe needs both. It needs farmers who can compete fairly and thrive, and it needs trade agreements that strengthen Europe's resilience, competitiveness and influence. The challenge really is not choosing between protection and openness. It is actually about finding a way to combine protection where harm is real, adaptation where vulnerability is structural, and cooperation where Europe's strategic interests are at stake. Because ultimately, the question is not whether Europe should trade. The real question is whether Europe can build a future in which its trade strategy and its farming model reinforce one another instead of pulling in opposite directions.